You understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is? Mike, I'm really wound up today. That's why I'm ranting a bit. But isn't this the response we should be having to just outrageous, statements about you deny global warming, you can't come to England, you criticize open borders, you can't come to England, you criticize the immigrants and welfare, you're arrested in England now? I mean, that's really happening, folks. They arrest people now. The same thing's happening in Canada. They're trying to set it up here. They're announcing in the New York Times an end of the free web, internet too, end of net neutrality. YouTube is just banning not just me. It's open season as they purge people. Clearly, I mean, the accounts everywhere I knew and directors I love, they're all being banned. I mean, and folks don't even know this attack is going on. It is just intensifying. What do we do about this, Mike Rivero?
Well, first of all, your response is absolutely appropriate. And one of the things I keep trying to tell my audience is we have been taught and trained we've been conditioned over the last several decades to view any strong emotions as negative. We're not supposed to hate. We're not supposed to be enraged. We're supposed to have anger management. We're supposed to be calm. We know there's trace amounts of tranquilizers in the water. But there comes a time when hate is an appropriate reaction if you're dealing with people engaged in hateful acts. And you're allowed to get angry. You have to give yourself permission to be enraged by what you see happening before you. And like I said, we're all dealing with this horrible psychic shock of waking up to realize that our government is not only torturing innocent people to death just over the last few years, it's been going on for decades. And we used to hear these little stories and we'd sort of dismiss them and say, oh, it's probably an isolated incident. It isn't. Torture has been a part of the policy of the United States government going back all the way to World War II.
I wanted to ask you about this. And
now we have to deal with that. Yeah.
In fact, it's part two. Have you seen, I'm sure you've seen it, Gonzalez came out as Obama now protects them for the torture and says he's going to continue it, but the rough interrogation, torture people with bugs, waterboarding, all of this. Now Gonzalez comes out and says we're going to have to torture again. This arrogant piece of filth is now, this Mingala is now defending it, saying it's good. He's thumbing his nose at everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet every expert tells you torture does not get you reliable information. If torture actually worked to get intelligence, then women in the Middle Ages really were turning themselves into black cats and flying over the village on their broomsticks. If torture really does work, then John McCain told the North Vietnamese everything they wanted to know. All these phony, false alarm terror attacks we'd have over the last 5 years all resulted from bad information acquired through torture. What torture does produce is terror on the part of the government. The government is trying to terrorize the rest of the world and the American people, that it's able and willing to do this kind of thing. And, of course, to force confessions, which is what the Spanish Inquisition used to use torture for. It's what the Nazis used torture for. We are going back to the Dark Ages, courtesy of the United States government. This is Dark Ages mentality these people are talking about. An interesting study that came out this last week. The more Christian people are, the more likely they are to agree with and support the use of torture. And that is, on one level, very surprising, and on the other, perhaps not quite so. Because fanatical people can do fanatical things.
Well, but that's the new establishment Christianity that says kill all the brown people because they're not Christians, let God sort them out. But now they kind of use the Christian step forward under Bush, fake Christian. Now it's the liberal communist step forward, but meanwhile it's that dialectic of left-right that the establishment uses to move forward, two different wings on the same bird.
Well, you're absolutely right about this left-right, Republican-Democrat. It's a false dichotomy to create the illusion there's still some kind of choice. But this last election kind of pretty much established that there really was no choice whatsoever.
That was my next issue. That was my next question for you. I'm really starting to see a lot of the Obamanoids wake up and realize, wait a minute, he's protecting them on torture. Wait a minute, he's oh, I haven't asked you your take on the flu hype. I mean, wasn't that clearly a smokescreen for Chrysler going under, for Obama's protecting Bush on torture, and for them saying we're going to forcibly inoculate you and have martial law in the future and lock down U.S. cities, but the border's going to stay open?
Well, definitely it was a media distraction, and certainly the pharmaceutical companies were very happy that it came along because they've made a huge amount of money, just like they did back in 1976. But yes, this was a media distraction. The media was just so happy to have something that they could report on that wasn't the economy, wasn't Jane Harmon, wasn't APAC, wasn't any of the things that the government is trying to keep us from paying attention to. And the fact that the pandemic has turned out to be a big bit of nothing, I think, is going to blow back on the corporate media and the government. Because once more, the American people are seeing the government that cried wolf, the corporate media that was reporting on a bogus story, while real stories important to all of us were being trivialized and marginalized.
You know, Obama keeps denying that he's anti-gun when he called for bans in Illinois, and his attorney general supported a total ban in the D.C. gun ban. He said nationwide, no civilian ownership of firearms. That's a quote. Now he's supporting a treaty that when I first read it and Gunners of America first read it, we just said it bans reloading as terrorism, as explosives manufacturer says it's terrorism, bans changing a barrel or manipulating, modifying your gun. But even Lou Dobbs and CNN analyzed it, and they were right. I hadn't noticed. It basically allows them to ban guns outright, the manufacture, importation, and export. And so in the words of a U.S. Senator and Lou Dobbs, it says it bans the Second Amendment. I mean, they are actually trying to pass a treaty to ban the Second Amendment. What is going to happen when the public finds out about that?
Well, I'm hoping the public will be very angry. In fact, I'm a little surprised we haven't seen more anger in the population yet. We've seen all these other countries like Iceland where the governments have already been brought down by a very angry populace. And I start wondering, what does it take to get the American people angry? And are we really being drugged by something in our drinking water? But to get back to this treaty, unfortunately, the way the Constitution is written, treaty obligations supersede all other laws in the United States. So if, in point of fact, they can get this treaty signed and ratified by the necessary number of states, then it does become law and the Second Amendment is null and void.
But you can go through the government to reverse the treaty, or, as the Declaration of Independence says, completely abolish the criminal fat-bellied government.
Well, I think we're kind of on that latter option right now. I think last September, when they passed all of these bailouts despite overwhelming public opposition, it is obvious the government isn't listening to us anymore. Taxes are going to go up to cover this $100,000 per taxpayer debt burden that's been added from the bailouts. We have taxation without representation. And the school I went to, I was taught that's a valid reason for kicking out the government.
But I keep stuttering and stumbling because it's so incredible even to me. I've known they were setting this up and building it, and they admitted it was a global tyranny, but to see them saying, we're going to ban your free speech, we're not going to give you jobs if you criticize the government, you'll have to have an ID card to have jobs, we're tracking everything you do, alternative media are terrorists, gun owners are terrorists, veterans are terrorists. I mean, it is a completely rogue, bankrupt government, openly run by offshore banks. I've got scores of articles about Chicago and Illinois police stealing people's cars, D.C. police tow people's cars legally parked and then keep them and take them to police chop shops. That's mainstream news. Dallas police are still planting drugs on people and taking their cars. Mainstream news. Just banks are stealing everything. I mean, the corruption is just, it is just unbelievable, Mike.
It is, and it's going to continue, and it's going to get worse until the people stand up and say no more. We have to have the right to say no to all of this stuff. There is no freedom without the freedom to say no, and the time to say no to all of this corruption is right now, because if we don't stand up and oppose them now when we've got a reasonable chance of victory, we're soon going to be in a situation where that possibility of victory is being eroded away smaller and smaller because the government will work to perpetuate its power.
And, Mike, that's how this inchworm effect works, as you know. If we allow YouTube to keep banning Marines throwing puppies off cliffs and then liberal groups, conservative groups ban Michael Savage, start banning me, then it bans everybody. You see, if we buckle under, I mean, they said, the Home Secretary in England, and all are also saying it in Canada, we're banning criticizing the EU, we're banning criticizing global warming, we're banning criticizing open borders. We want this to be a chilling effect, they're saying, to teach you you're going to be penalized if you do this. That demands rebellion in the info war. Because I keep saying 90%, as the military says, of war is info war. 90% of it is speaking out. As Thomas Jefferson kept saying, educate the whole of the people about liberty and tyranny will fade. People keep asking what the solution is. It's rally. It's say no. It's speak out. It's rebuke this government. And, you keep talking about drugs in the water. Look, I see stuff like this every week, and I didn't even cover this last week. That's how conditioned I am. And again, they just keep, I have MSNBC, CNN saying they want to put drugs in the water to make Americans not depressed. They're doing that because they know it's coming out. They're already doing it, and I can prove it in a moment. They have the Japanese government, British government coming out saying we want to put Prozac and lithium in the water, saying we want to put statin drugs for even for children in the water. Everyone needs to go on statin drugs for cholesterol, and that's shown to be a fraud. Look at this, lithium in the water, and it goes on to have the Japanese government, BBC, saying they should put lithium in the water. That's a hardcore antipsychotic, literally turns you into a zombie mentally. And then I have this article, more Americans taking drugs for mental illness, Reuters, and there was 50% more people on drugs last year than a few years, than 2000, from 2006 to 1996, the study's a few years late, they always take time, and they had over 100 million prescriptions in 2008 for Prozac alone. Go ahead, sir.